Resident Evil fans have eaten well these last 30 years, with 9 numbered games, at least 12 spin-offs, multiple film franchises, 4 separate stage plays, a dozen patches slot machines, and a semi-canonical theme park ride. Capcom's survival horror staple has offered Resident Evil fans much to chew on, and that's just what made it out the door. In a franchise as dense and prolific as Resident Evil, there's bound to be a buffet congealing on the cutting room floor. These abandoned Resident Evil games have become the stuff of legend, a discarded drafts folder full of entirely new franchises, from ports that push classic hardware past its limits to phantom prototypes that a devoted community has spent years hunting down, some of which you can even play today. But be warned, the lost games of Resident Evil can really get their hooks in you. Between unusually candid developers and an obsessive fan community that has spent years unearthing franchise history, we know the game that would become Resident Evil passed through some radical incarnations on its way to the 1996 classic Biohazard, first-person perspectives, cyborg super soldiers, and a creative partnership between director Shinji Mikami and his collaborator Hideki Kamiya that would both shape and derail some of the most fascinating games Capcom never released. Games like Resident Evil 1.5. It wasn't originally called that, of course. Capcom quickly greenlit Resident Evil 2 after the surprise success of the first game and tapped Kamiya to take the lead. He envisioned Raccoon City itself under siege from the zombie swarms, with rookie cop Leon S. Kennedy trapped inside the police headquarters with a motorcycle-riding college student as his co-protagonist. That's about where the similarities end. The police station Kamiya built was a shiny, fluorescent-lit modern station house rather than the sprawling converted museum of the real Resident Evil 2's RPD HQ. Zombies would have fewer polygons but come in greater on-screen numbers, while characters wore armor and accumulated visible damage. Chief Irons was an avuncular authority figure, while Claire Redfield was nowhere to be seen. Instead, the star of the second disc was slated to be Elsa Walker, a blonde biker with no ties to first-game hero Chris. The game was extremely far along in development when producer Mikami, who had been watching from a distance, finally tasted what Kamiya was cooking and sent it back to the kitchen. By all accounts, the game was boring, samey, and bland, with ugly zombies and uninspired architecture. Kamiya himself later admitted that he wasn't up to the challenge, so he called in a ringer, veteran tokusatsu writer Noboru Sujimura, best known for penning Kyoru Sentai Zuranger, the Super Sentai series that would later become Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, was a huge fan of the first game and agreed to come aboard and craft the RE2 we know today. But how do we know so much about a game we were never supposed to see? Actually, we saw quite a lot of it. Unlike most lost games, the unraveling of Resident Evil 1.5 was extraordinarily public. Magazine coverage, trade show appearances, and promotional videos kept coming even after the game had already been axed internally. We are still seeing footage of 1.5 as late as December of 1997 with a completely different actual RE2 just 1 month from release. Remnants survived in unexpected places, cut content on a director's cut bonus disc, leftover assets buried in an early RE2 demo, all of which became essential when fans eventually went looking. A scene coalesced around the mysterious missing Resi game, flooding forums with rumors, hoaxes, and an all-encompassing search for builds that preservationists were convinced existed somewhere in the wild. In 2011, hunters traced a prototype version to a deceased Capcom employee's estate sale and pooled $8,000 to acquire it, but instead of releasing it to the public, they kept it to themselves. The group known as Team Igas, for I've Got a Shotgun, promised to shape the roughly 40% complete data into something playable before sharing it with the world, which did not go over well with the diehards who had spent decades lusting after it. Some fans wanted Kamiya's original pure vanilla build preserved perfectly for posterity, others were content to wait for a reconstruction, many were still chasing something else entirely, the mythical 80% build, the nearly finished version that caused Mikami to pull the plug. This extremely nerdy standoff ended when a leaker took the decision out of Igas' hands entirely and released the build publicly in 2013. Today, Resi 1.5 is the rarest kind of lost media, one you can actually experience. The build is fully playable, though not beatable, and the community reconstruction efforts are ongoing. Nearly 3 decades after its demise, the resurrected corpse of Resident Evil 1.5 still isn't finished with us. And it's not the only long-lost Resident Evil game that fans have dragged back from the dead. Resident Evil has never been a stranger to handheld hardware, though its early track record came with some casualties. The series' portable debut on Tiger's doomed ignominious Gamecom device in 1998 bode ill for Resi's viability in one's pocket, but Capcom wasn't about to give up on the idea of carrying survival horror around in your shorts. The hardware wasn't making it easy. Handheld gaming was in its AA battery and magnifying lens era, a time of chunky, underpowered devices with atrocious screens and inadequate backlights. None were obvious candidates to host one of the PlayStation's most atmospheric games. In 1999, Capcom hired a small London studio called HotGen to shrink Resident Evil down to the Game Boy Color's 2.3-inch screen. This could be accomplished two ways. Create a bespoke port that plays to the GBC's strengths, perhaps a top-down experience akin to its 8-bit ancestor Sweet Home, or attempt to cram a 514-megabyte CD-ROM into an 8-megabyte game pack. HotGen chose the latter, and they very nearly pulled it off. The team recreated hundreds of Capcom's pre-rendered backgrounds for the GBC's 160 by 144 pixel 56-color display. Characters scale dynamically with depth and distance on a CPU that wasn't designed in 1974. The results are ugly by any reasonable standard and astonishing by every other. It really is the entire PSX game squeezed into a translucent plastic slab the size of a matchbook. The project reached near completion before Capcom pulled the plug, citing concerns about the final product's appeal. One developer has hinted that one of Resident Evil's original creators didn't think the port was worthy of their achievement. Whatever the reason, whoever made the call, they failed to keep the game buried forever. An incomplete build leaked in 2011, functional but rough. In December of 2025, preservation site Games That Weren't surfaced a 98% content-complete build provided by assistant programmer Pete Frith. It's missing a few months of polish, but it's entirely possible to clear Jill Valentine's complete campaign from the Spencer Mansion's welcome mat to scraping tyrant guts off her boots. Capcom quietly replaced the cancelled port with Resident Evil Gaiden in 2001, an original GBC title developed by M4, set on a cruise ship and built from the ground up for the aging portable hardware. Gaiden feels like a stopgap and is largely forgotten, overshadowed as it was by the launch of the Game Boy Advance. GBA never received a Resi game, though some Italian developers pitched a port of RE2 for the platform. Capcom passed on their demo and decided to tackle Resident Evil's handheld future on its own. It was the right call. Resident Evil Deadly Silence delivered the original experience into a convenient clamshell case using every lovable gimmick of Nintendo DS's in a new Rebirth mode alongside the untouched classic. Later, Resident Evil Revelations on 3DS would fulfill the franchise's promise of a full-blooded survival horror experience on the go. The modern RE engine takes it even further, with today's flagship Resi titles running beautifully on powerful PC hardware like the Steam Deck, a long way from squinting at a worm light in the back seat of Grandpa's car. Resident Evil, it turns out, can run on almost anything, even the Nintendo 64. Capcom contractor Angel Studios miraculously compressed 1.2 gigabytes of Resident Evil 2 onto a 64 megabyte cartridge, including its CG cutscenes unheard of on the N64, with extra features and high-res graphics, courtesy of the almighty expansion pack. But Capcom's internal crew had a harder time realizing their vision on the platform. Envisioned as an exclusive for Nintendo's ill-fated 64DD add-on, Resident Evil 0 was intended to use the peripheral's read-write capabilities to expand RE2's zapping system and do all kinds of neat stuff with dual protagonists. The game would be more difficult with no bottomless item boxes, instead paying homage to the pioneering drop your stuff on the ground and hope someone else finds it game mechanic of the series' progenitor, Sweet Home. Local co-op allowed Rebecca Chambers and Billy Cohen to survive from the same couch, all without a loading screen in sight. Despite the best efforts of Doshin the Giant, the 64DD sank quickly. Development at Capcom Studio 3 switched to the N64 proper and all the size limitations that came with it. While the team at Studio 4 had two whole GD-ROMs for their simultaneously developed Dreamcast project, Code Veronica, the RE0 crew had to make do with just a few dozen megabytes of ROM at their disposal. They designed the game accordingly, avoiding space hogs like cutscenes in favor of leaner, harder experiences with faster zombies and on-the-fly instant character switching. The game was real. Footage was shown off at E3 and screenshots were widely available to the press. Living, breathing human beings played a demo at Tokyo Game Show 2000, and a Japanese variety show even did a segment showcasing the early build on a big, bulky prototype cartridge. Resident Evil 0 was around 10% complete and growing increasingly unfeasible on the N64 platform when the project was saved by the intervention of a marine mammal. Capcom's relationship with Nintendo's Project Dolphin, later known as the GameCube, is the stuff of legend, a partnership that produced so many bangers that a handful of them have had a cool name and their own Wikipedia page. The past and future of Resident Evil was about to be written on that purple, behandled box, and it was the perfect home for Resident Evil 0. After switching hardware twice, Studio 3 was able to land the plane with the Resident Evil 0 we have today, a flawed gem with cool ideas. The scenario and characters survived the transition and were expanded for the GameCube's generous optical discs that gave the team some breathing room and brought back loading screens. The running zombies concept was quietly snatched up for the 2002 RE remake, but it's largely the natural progression of what we saw in that N64 footage. It's not unlike the journey of Mother 3, another title orphaned by the 64DD and eventually relies on a platform better suited for its strengths. Unlike the previous entries on this list, there is no code of the N64 RE0 in the wild, not that it stopped fans from looking and even coming tantalizingly close. In 2018, a curious collector peeled back the label of their N64 developer cartridge containing a prototype of Mega Man 64 and revealed a Biohazard Zero label underneath. At one point, the EEPROM within held a build of RE0 written over long ago for the adventures of Rock Volnut. RE0's N64 prototype might be gone, but at least we know it existed. Some lost Resi games are purely ethereal. No build to recover, no demo to play, no grainy trailers captured on a mini DV camcorder in Kensha Hall, just rumors of what could have been. A ghost like Kamiya's original vision for Resident Evil 3. Codenamed Ship Bio, the sequel starred Hunk, the gas-masked umbrella mercenary from RE2's brutal bonus scenario, the fourth survivor sent to recover the G-Virus from a cruise ship overrun with human-plant hybrids. When Sony announced the PlayStation 2 in 1998, the developers grew nervous about releasing a major title on dying hardware and pulled the plug. Instead, an internal side project called Resident Evil Gaiden was hastily promoted to mainline status and became Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, not to be confused with the GBC Resident Evil Gaiden, which was set on a ship, or the original concept for Resident Evil 3, which was also set on a ship. Capcom was clearly scared shipless by the advent of new hardware, and Kamiya's project was redirected towards a next-gen PS2 game.
Biohazard 4.
Resident Evil 4 was famously controversial, a GameCube exclusive at least before it was ported to practically everything with integrated circuits, but the game Kamiya began developing was unrecognizable from the RE4 we've come to know. No sass-talking Leon, no Plagas, no pro wrestling moves, an unthinkable alternate universe in which Ingrid Hunnigan never existed. Resi historians have cataloged at least 4 distinct versions of the game, with each unique enough to earn its own name and all of which left their mark on the eventual classic. Hideki Kamiya's version came first. Today, it's called Stylish. Starring Tony Redgrave, the red and black clad superpowered son of Umbrella founder and Mansion namesake Oswald E. Spencer, the so-called stylish version of RE4 ditched pre-rendered backgrounds for the heroism and agency of an active camera as we storm the castle stronghold of Mallet Island with Aura and Riz to spare. If any of this sounds familiar, that's because it's literally Devil May Cry, and fans of the series have Shinji Mikami to thank for its existence.
This party's getting crazy. Let's rock.
He felt the concept was too flashy for survival horror and firmly encouraged Kamiya to transition the game into a fresh IP more suited to his sensibilities, so RE4 became 2001's Devil May Cry. The goopy sci-fi body horror of Resident Evil got a mythological makeover. Tony and his Les Enfants Terribles twin Paul became the dashing, demon-maxing Dante and Virgil. DMC1 willed itself into existence from the cutting room floor by being cool, outrageous, and addictive, birthing a hit franchise and arguably the entire character action genre from the recycle bin. The DNA of RE4 is all over the final game, and much of the enemy and character design legwork coming from Resi-era concept art. The stylish RE4 was never previewed, and little of it survives today. It's lost by any definition of the word, except for the fact that you can buy and play DMC1 on modern hardware right now. Kamiya transmogrified his latest attempt at Resident Evil into an SSS-ranked swan song from Capcom, the only DMC he directed before leaving to co-found Platinum Games and create Bayonetta. With Kamiya occupied, Capcom tapped director Hiroshi Shibata to build a new RE4 from the bones of his original pitch, resulting in another abandoned attempt dubbed Castle. RE4 had a new target platform in 2002. Capcom stunned the industry by entering a blockbuster exclusivity deal with Nintendo, promising 5 flagship games for the new GameCube overseen by Shinji Mikami. The announcement of the so-called Capcom 5 was accompanied by the only extant footage of the castle or fog version that exists. We see Leon arrive at the aforementioned fortress on an airship, already rocking the immortal bomber jacket that would outlast every console version of the game. Like the final RE4, the plot involves Leon battling a mutagenic infection, although unlike the Plaga, this virus would slowly consume his left arm. Along the way, he encounters the imprisoned young woman protected by a trained BOW dog. The castle still belongs to Spencer, but the camera hasn't found its paradigm-shifting place over the shoulder yet as Leon battles a swirling black mass of tentacles. The signature fog monster proved too ambitious for GameCube hardware to render convincingly, and the castle version was raised at roughly 40% completion. The script was sent to a separate Capcom team who built a new game called Haunting Ground around the girl and her mutant canine as RE4 started over once more. Noboru Sugimura, the Sentai scribe turned savior who rescued the Resi 2 narrative, had become somewhat of a lore master for the series. Through his scenario writing studio flagship, he was tasked with cracking the RE4 conundrum. With the emancipation of Devil May Cry and the failure of Castle, co-writer Yasuhisa Kawamura had an idea. The man who scripted RE Nemesis had grown weary of the physical limits imposed by vintage Resi biopunk and was acutely aware that Konami's Silent Hill was eating Capcom's lunch in the psychological terror department. Inspired by the cerebral mindbenders like Lost Souls and Jacob's Ladder, Kawamura pitched a pivot. More than a mere mutation, Leon's infection would plunge him into madness. This build became known as Hallucination.
Resident Evil 4.
It was a huge departure, though somewhat less blasphemous to purists than the stylized dash cancels and devil triggers of Kamiya's early prototype. Still, it was growing clearer that the franchise needed a shot of adrenaline. Shinji Mikami gave the Hallucination build his public blessing at E3 2003. Wearing the heck out of some Wachowskian wraparounds, he assured the crowd that his twice rebooted game was doing just fine and introduced the first real footage. Unlike the cinematic castle teaser, Capcom premiered what appeared to be genuine gameplay. Leon's character model looks familiar, but development is clearly further along. There are hints of a UI, while parries and quicktime events are on full display. The camera still utilized cinematic semi-fixed tracking, but when Leon raises his weapon, the view aggressively snaps to his shoulder and a familiar red laser sight pierces the darkness. Then things get strange. The mundane castle geometry bleeds into a bleached, sickly blue nightmare world. Creepy dolls and mannequins litter the corridors, taxidermy deer heads fall from the wall and writhe at your feet. Suits of armor spring to life and attack you while a ghostly figure wielding a hook and chain drifts out of an infernal painting as Leon desperately backs away. It's Resident Evil taken to its paranormal conclusion, a castle that wants to kill you. But like Leon's on-screen visions, the Hookman demo was an illusion. To pull off the seamless real-time hallucination shifts, the dev team had to keep two complete environmental models loaded into memory simultaneously. Nintendo's adorable purple hexahedron simply didn't have the RAM. The GameCube, which had effortlessly dazzled with the gorgeous pre-rendered backgrounds of 2002's remake, buckled under the weight of Resi 4's 3D dreams. The game had hit a wall. The Hallucination version was scrapped, and Sugimura and Kawamura quietly exited the project. It wasn't even the last time the game would be rebooted. Desperate for traction, director Shibata went back to basics for his final attempt. The penultimate prototype pitted Leon against traditional slow-moving ghouls in the real-ish Resi world. Fans appropriately dub it Zombie.
I'm sure you boys didn't just tag along so we could sing Kumbaya together at some Boy Scout bonfire.
The name fits for more than one reason. Returning to the well of shuffling corpses was like witnessing a series go stagnant and decompose in real time. Mikami, overseeing from his producer role, concluded that his predecessors had been right about one thing: the series needed to change or die. Mikami decided to do it himself. Stepping in as director, Mikami swept the table clean and rewrote the scenario in just 3 weeks. No more Umbrella, no more T-Virus, no more fixed cameras. Instead, the player found themselves fighting parasites in remote rural villages and cutting pro wrestling promos on a strange little man in a tricorn hat. The new game would have a heavy mechanical focus on aiming and combat supplied by intelligently generated item barrels as the camera detached from the wall and locked firmly to Leon Kennedy's broad shoulders. After a truly tortured development cycle, Resident Evil 4 finally shipped in 2005, invigorating the franchise and influencing the next decade of action and adventure games. It was an awkward, agonizing rebirth, but Resi is nothing if not resilient.
Guess that's a local's way of breaking the ice.
Time and time again, the teams behind RE were willing to take a hard look at their work and make the painful decision to go back to the drawing board. It's easy to view a scrap prototype or canceled port as a colossal waste of time, countless hours and resources left to rot in Capcom's basement, but without the awkward growing pains of those abandoned projects, the landscape of survival horror, if not the entire video game industry, would be unrecognizable today. These phantom games could have easily faded into obscurity, but they live on thanks to a tireless, dedicated community that refuses to let sleeping Cerberuses lie. Fans have become digital preservationists, sniffing out ROMs and collaborating on ancient, unfinished code to unravel the mysteries behind one of the most bankable and beloved franchises in modern media. 3 decades after the original Outbreak, it's clear that in the world of Resident Evil, nothing ever really stays dead.
Thanks. That should keep me company, 'cause boredom kills me.
If you like this video and are interested in learning more about the history of Resident Evil, why not check out our documentaries that dive into obscure Resident Evil sound effects and a mysterious but iconic gamer who discovered a game-changing glitch in RE4. And for everything else Resident Evil, be sure to stick with IGN.